My daughter-in-law kicked me out the day after my son's funeral. No warning, no tears, just cold eyes and the sound of the front door locking behind me. Her words still echo, "You're not family anymore. Michael's gone, and so is your place here." I stood on that porch with my suitcase, staring at the house I helped them buy. I'd sold my own home years ago to give them the down payment. I thought I was helping my son build a future. I never imagined his wife would erase me from it the moment he died. For days I lived out of a motel room, replaying every conversation, wondering if I'd missed the signs. Then the call came, from the lawyer. "Mrs. Cooper, your son left something for you. You'll want to be here when we read the will." That was the day everything changed. My name is Nancy Cooper, I'm 67 years old, and I live alone in Bloomington, Indiana. I never thought I would be starting my story this way, but I guess life doesn't give you a warning before it changes everything. I had one son, Michael. He was 45, kind, funny, the sort of man who always put everyone else first. And on that night, the night everything broke, the phone rang at 3:17 in the morning. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I saw Michael's name on the screen, and I sat up straight. His voice was shaking like he could barely breathe. "Mom," he said, "my chest hurts. I can't." And then the line went quiet. I kept saying his name, asking if he could hear me, but all I got back was silence. I called him again and again, but no answer. Something in my gut told me to get in the car. It was raining hard that night. I drove as fast as I could, barely seeing the road, my hands tight on the wheel. I remember praying out loud the whole way, telling God to just let him be okay, promising anything if he'd let me see my boy alive. When I pulled into the hospital parking lot, I could see the flashing red lights from the ambulance bay. That image is still burned into my mind. Inside, the smell of disinfectant hit me first. The lights were bright, too bright. Everything looked too clean for something so terrible to be happening. I ran up to the desk, asked for Michael Cooper, and the nurse looked at me with that face I've seen in movies but hoped I'd never see in real life. She didn't have to say it, but she did. "He didn't make it, ma'am. I'm sorry." I remember standing there, not crying, not screaming, just standing. It felt like the world stopped moving. I walked to the room anyway because I had to see him. He looked peaceful, too peaceful. His jacket was still warm when I touched it, but his skin wasn't. That's the kind of detail you never forget. The doctor said something about a heart attack, how it happened fast, how they tried everything. I nodded, even though I didn't hear most of it. Amber, my daughter-in-law, was standing near the door. She wasn't crying. She looked tired but calm, too calm for someone who had just lost her husband. I wanted to hug her, but she didn't look at me. She took out her phone instead. I saw her type something. I didn't mean to read it, but my eyes caught the words. "It's done. He's gone." I told myself she was just telling her family. I wanted to believe that. I sat down next to Michael's bed and held his hand. It still felt like him, even though I knew he was gone. I kept thinking about the last time I saw him alive, just 2 days before. He'd stopped by to fix the leaky faucet in my kitchen. He laughed when I told him he was getting old, and he kissed me on the cheek before he left. "Don't worry about me, Mom," he said. "I'll see you Sunday." I would give anything to go back to that moment. When you lose a child, something in you just shuts off. I've buried my parents and my husband before him, but losing Michael was different. It's not supposed to happen that way. Your child isn't supposed to go first. I kept telling myself I had to stay strong, but all I could do was stare at the wall. At one point, Amber came closer and said quietly, "We'll handle things." I didn't know what she meant, but the way she said it didn't sound like comfort. It sounded like business. She left soon after, still holding her phone, still dry-eyed. I stayed until the nurse said they had to move him. As I walked out of that hospital, the rain had stopped, but the streets were shiny and empty. I sat in the car for a long time, holding the steering wheel, trying to remember how to breathe. The world outside kept going, cars passed, lights changed, but for me, everything just froze. On the way home, I remembered something from years ago. Michael was maybe 8 years old. It was pouring rain, and he showed up at my school during lunch with a paper bag in his hand. "You forgot your sandwich, Mom," he said, soaking wet but smiling. "You always forget to eat when you're busy." I laughed then. I didn't know that small memory would come back to me on the night I lost him. That's who my son was. Always thinking about others, always trying to make things easier for me. I used to tell him he didn't need to take care of me, but I see now that's just who he was. He never stopped being my boy, even when he became a man. Sitting alone in that hospital room, I whispered, "You always took care of me, Michael. You kept your word until the end." I didn't know it then, but he had kept his word in ways I couldn't imagine. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, feeling the weight of what had happened. Some people say grief comes in waves. For me, it came in silence. The kind that fills every corner of a room and doesn't leave when you turn off the lights. I thought losing my son was the worst thing that could happen. I didn't know that the real heartbreak was still waiting for me, right inside the home I helped him build. The funeral was held at a small church in Bloomington, the one Michael and Amber used to attend on Christmas and Easter. The air smelled like lilies and candle wax. The sound of the organ filled the room, low, steady, almost heavy. I sat in the front row, my hands gripping the folded piece of paper that held the eulogy I'd written the night before. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up slowly. My legs felt weak, like they belonged to someone else. The room was full, but quiet. I looked at Michael's photo. He was smiling, the same gentle smile he always had when he didn't want people to worry about him. My voice shook as I began. My son once told me, "Mom, you are my home." I paused for a moment to breathe. But today, I have no home to go back to. Some people nodded, others wiped their eyes. I stepped down and sat back in my seat. Amber walked past me to fix one of the flower arrangements. Her face was calm, almost blank. She cried softly at moments, just enough for people to notice, but her eyes were dry when no one was looking. She moved around the church like she was managing an event, not saying goodbye to her husband. I watched her whisper to the photographer, check her phone, and give instructions to the man from the funeral home. It didn't look like grief. It looked like control. When the service ended, people lined up to give condolences. "He was such a good man," they said. "You must be so proud." I nodded and thanked them. Behind me, I could hear Amber telling someone about the flowers and the cost of the reception, her voice light, businesslike. Later, at the reception hall, I noticed the table of photos Amber had arranged. There were pictures of Michael at work, at their wedding, on vacation with her family, but not one photo of me and him together. I stood there for a moment, staring at the display, waiting for someone to notice. No one did. I finally asked her quietly, "Amber, where's the picture of Michael and me?" She turned, barely glancing up from her glass of water. "I thought the wedding photo looked more fitting, Mom. Guests don't need to see personal ones." She said it so casually, like it was just a decoration choice. I wanted to be angry, but I was too tired. "Of course," I said. "You know best." She nodded and walked away before I could say anything else. A couple of my old friends from church came up to me while I was still standing there. They spoke in soft voices. "Nancy," one of them whispered, "we heard she might sell the house soon. Maybe move to Chicago?" I forced a small smile. "She hasn't said anything to me," I replied, though deep down I already knew it was true. As the afternoon went on, people started to leave. Amber was busy thanking guests and talking to her sister. I stood alone near the casket, looking at the flowers beginning to wilt. I reached out and placed my hand on the wood. It felt smooth and cold. "You told me this house would always have a place for me, Michael," I whispered. "But now it feels like even this world doesn't." I stayed there a while longer, just standing because I didn't know where else to go. Everyone else seemed to have somewhere to be. I had nowhere. When it was finally time to close the casket, the sound of the hinges echoed through the church, louder than anything else that day. Amber didn't look up. She was already talking to the funeral director about paperwork. I walked outside into the cold afternoon air. The sky was gray and the trees were bare. For a moment, I just stood there, watching the cars drive by, people going on with their lives. I don't know which is harder, losing your child or realizing that the person they loved the most can't even look at you as family anymore. It was the night after the funeral. The house was too quiet. The smell of flowers from the service still hung in the air, mixed with the faint scent of candles and something burnt in the kitchen. Amber had cooked dinner, roasted chicken, salad, and wine, but the table felt more like a business meeting than a family meal. She sat across from me, straight-backed, perfect posture as always. Her hair was pulled neatly into a bun, not a strand out of place. She looked tired but composed. I sat at the other end, still wearing my black dress from the service. My hands were folded in my lap because I didn't know what else to do with them. We ate in silence for a while. The sound of her fork tapping against the plate was the only thing filling the room. Then she cleared her throat. Mom, she said, her tone calm and polite, I think we need to talk about our living arrangements. I looked up confused. Our what? She gave a small, patient smile like she was explaining something obvious. The space, the house. You know, how things will be moving forward. I felt my stomach tighten. What do you mean, Amber? She set her fork down, folded her hands neatly, and spoke like someone giving a presentation. This house was in Michael's name. Now that he's gone, it legally belongs to me, and I think it would be best if we both had some time and space to adjust. It took me a few seconds to process what she was saying. Adjust, I repeated quietly. She nodded. Yes, it's been hard for both of us, and I just think having the house to myself would help me heal. I need privacy. My heart started to beat faster. Amber, I said softly, trying to stay calm, I sold my house to help Michael make the down payment for this place. $40,000. I did that so he and you could have a home together. You both told me I could stay here as long as I needed. She tilted her head slightly, still smiling, but her eyes were cold. And I appreciate that truly. You've helped us a lot. But that doesn't mean you have a legal claim here. It was a gift, wasn't it? I stared at her. A gift? Yes, she said, taking a sip of wine. You never asked for it back. Michael handled the finances, and I assumed you didn't expect repayment. I wanted to argue, but my throat felt dry. I looked down at my plate. I didn't ask for it back because I trusted my own son, I said quietly, because I thought family meant something. Amber leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. It does, Mom, but things are different now. Michael's gone. You need your own space, and so do I. There was a long pause. I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. I looked around the room, the photos on the wall, the couch where Michael used to fall asleep watching TV, the kitchen island where we used to eat pancakes on Sundays. Every corner of this house had his presence. Where exactly am I supposed to go? I finally asked. Amber shrugged. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're independent. Maybe an apartment nearby, or one of those senior living places. I can help you research. Her tone was sweet, almost friendly, like she was doing me a favor. I set my fork down. Do I have a deadline, or is this just a suggestion? Amber smiled again, that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Let's say a week. That should be enough time to pack and make arrangements. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I didn't trust my voice anymore. I could feel my hands shaking under the table. For a moment I thought of Michael, his laugh, his voice, the way he always said, Mom, don't worry, I'll take care of you. I wanted to scream that this house was built on his promise, on my money, on my love, but looking at Amber, I knew it wouldn't matter. She stood up, gathering her plate. I'll handle the paperwork for the utilities and mortgage transfer next week, she said. Oh, and if you need help with movers, let me know. I can recommend someone. I looked at her for a long moment. Her face was calm, polite, detached. There wasn't an ounce of guilt there. I gave a small laugh, though it didn't sound like me. So that's it, I said quietly. $40,000 for 2 years of being part of this family. Amber hesitated for a second and then said, It's not about money, Mom. It's about boundaries. I wanted to tell her that love doesn't have boundaries, that families don't come with expiration dates. But there was no point. She'd already made up her mind. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and took my plate to the sink. The food was still warm, but I couldn't taste anything. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, like the air had been drained out of it. She started loading the dishwasher while humming softly to herself, a song I didn't recognize. I looked at her one last time and realized that whatever connection we once had, even if it was only polite, was gone. When I went upstairs that night, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place I was just visiting. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the half-packed boxes from the funeral, her words replayed in my head. You're independent. You'll figure it out. And I knew then that grief doesn't just take the people you love, it takes the places where you thought you belonged. Her words weren't sharp or loud, but they cut deeper than anything I'd ever heard. I didn't bleed on the outside, but inside I could feel something breaking open. It took me 2 days to start packing. Not because I had that much to take, but because I didn't know where to start. The room felt smaller now that I knew I was leaving it. Every sound seemed louder, the rain against the window, the creak of the floor, the sharp rip of packing tape cutting through silence. I sat on the edge of the bed looking at the half-empty closet. Most of what was left fit into a few suitcases and cardboard boxes. Michael had helped me unpack these same boxes 2 years ago when I first moved in. I could still hear his voice. "Don't worry, Mom," he had said, smiling as he stacked the boxes by the wall. "This is just temporary. Once things settle, we'll figure out something better for you." I believed him. I always did. He'd kissed my forehead, told me Amber was happy to have me there, and that I made the house feel warmer. I remember how proud he looked, showing me the guest room and saying, "This is your space, Mom. Make it yours." Now, it wasn't mine anymore. I folded the last few sweaters and put them on top of the pile. My hands kept shaking. I wasn't angry. I was just tired. The kind of tired that sits in your bones and doesn't go away with sleep. As I sealed one of the boxes, I heard footsteps behind me. Amber was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, her arms crossed. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even pretending to be sad. "Need help?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I've got it." She nodded once, then looked around the room. "Don't forget," she said, picking up a small box from the dresser. Inside was Michael's old watch, the one he'd worn every day since college. "Michael left this for me. He said it was mine." I looked at the watch for a long time. The metal was scratched, the band a little worn. It wasn't worth much, not in money, but it was the last thing that had touched his wrist. I forced a small smile. "Then take it," I said quietly. "You're the one in charge now. You're the owner of everything." She gave a small, polite nod. "It's not about ownership, Mom. It's just what Michael wanted." I wanted to say that Michael would never want this. He'd never want his mother treated like a stranger. But what was the point? She'd already convinced herself she was right. When she left the room, I stood there for a while, staring at the empty space where the watch had been. I didn't realize how heavy silence could feel until that moment. Outside, the rain kept falling. It had been raining all week, like the sky couldn't decide when to stop grieving. Through the window, I could see the small backyard, the garden I used to tend when Michael was at work. The flowers were gone now, replaced by Amber's new patio furniture. I taped up another box. The sound of the tape stretching and snapping filled the room. It sounded final, like a door closing. When I carried the first suitcase downstairs, I saw the family photos lining the hallway. Amber had taken down the ones with me in them. Now it was just her and Michael, smiling, perfect, like nothing had ever gone wrong. I wondered when she did that. Maybe right after the funeral, maybe even before. I made a few trips back and forth from the room to my car. It was slow work. My knees ached, but I didn't ask for help. Amber watched from the living room, scrolling through her phone. She didn't offer to carry a thing. By the time I brought down the last box, the rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet pavement. I stepped outside to load the trunk of my old car. That's when I heard a small voice from across the yard. "Miss Nancy?" I looked up. It was Lucy, the little girl from next door. She was standing by the fence, holding her white cat in her arms. Her big brown eyes were wet. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly, walking over. "You're up late." She sniffled. "Mom said you're moving away. Is that true?" I nodded. "Yeah, I'm going to see a bit of the world for a while." Her chin started to tremble. "But who's going to feed the birds? You always put out crumbs." I smiled and reached over the fence to brush her hair back. "You can do it for me now. You'll be my helper, okay?" Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I don't want you to go." Without thinking, I leaned down and hugged her over the fence, holding her as tight as I could. She was small and warm, and she smelled like soap and rain. "Don't cry, Lucy," I whispered. "People go away sometimes, but that doesn't mean they're gone forever. We just carry them somewhere else, that's all." She nodded against my shoulder, still sobbing. I stayed there a few seconds longer, then let her go. She wiped her face and tried to smile, but it only made me ache more. "Bye, Miss Nancy," she said. "Bye, honey." I walked back to the car and closed the trunk. Amber was standing on the porch now, her arms folded again. "Are you all set?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes." "Good. I'll have the locks changed next week, just so you know." I looked at her one last time. "Of course," I said. I got into the car and started the engine. For a moment, I didn't move. I looked up at the window of what used to be my room, the curtain still half open, the light off. It looked exactly like it did the day I moved in, like I had never been there at all. As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse of Lucy through the mirror. She was still standing by the fence, clutching her cat. Her small figure framed by the gray sky behind her. She was crying, and somehow, I felt she was crying for both of us, because I didn't have any tears left. The room at Riverbend Inn smelled like bleach and cigarette smoke, the kind of smell that never really goes away, no matter how many air fresheners they spray. The carpet was old, the wallpaper was peeling near the corners, and the heater made a low humming sound that filled the silence. I had booked the cheapest room they had. It didn't matter where I stayed. Nothing felt like home anymore. I sat on the bed, staring at the suitcases lined up by the door. 4 of them. My whole life packed into 4 old suitcases and 2 boxes sitting in my car. It's strange how 70 years of living can fit into the trunk of a sedan. The bedspread was rough, and the air conditioner leaked a steady drip onto the windowsill. I turned on the small lamp by the bed, and its light cast a yellow circle on the table. I found a notepad and a pen in the drawer, the kind every motel leaves behind, and I started to write a letter. "Michael," I wrote, "you said marriage was the most beautiful thing in life, but you forgot to mention, it's only beautiful if both people mean it." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I tore the paper slowly, piece by piece. The sound of ripping filled the room. I dropped the pieces into the trash and leaned back in the chair. From the next room, I could hear a television playing. A commercial came on, something about a vacation resort. The announcer's voice was too cheerful, and the fake laughter in the background made me feel sick. I turned up the volume on my thoughts instead. I looked at myself in the mirror across from the bed. The light from the lamp made the lines on my face stand out sharper than usual. My eyes looked tired, older than I remembered. "A woman who's lost everything," I whispered to my reflection, "and still doesn't know why." I used to think grief was loud, full of tears and screams. But it's not. It's quiet. It's sitting alone in a room like this, wondering what you're supposed to do next. For dinner, I ate a granola bar from my bag and drank water from the bathroom sink. I didn't have the energy to go out. I turned off the lamp and lay on the bed, listening to the rain outside. The neon motel sign flickered through the curtains. Riverbend Inn, vacancy. The red light pulsed across the wall like a heartbeat. My mind kept replaying everything. Michael's voice on the phone, the doctor's face, Amber's cold tone, the look on her face when she said, "You'll figure something out." I thought about Lucy crying at the fence. It all played like an endless loop. For a moment, I closed my eyes and pretended I was back in my old house, the one I sold to help them buy theirs. I imagined Michael walking through the door, dropping his keys in the bowl, smiling like he always did. "Mom," he'd say, "what's for dinner?" The memory was so clear it hurt. I opened my eyes again. The ceiling was stained, a faint brown patch spreading above the bed. I focused on it, counting my breaths, anything to keep from crying, but the tears came anyway, slow and quiet. Hours must have passed, though I couldn't tell how many. The sound of rain grew softer, replaced by the faint hum of traffic outside. I sat up, wiping my eyes, when suddenly the phone on the nightstand rang. The sound startled me. It was too loud in that quiet room. I hesitated before answering, thinking maybe it was the front desk calling by mistake. I picked it up anyway. "Mrs. Cooper?" a man's voice said. "This is Bob Tully. I'm a lawyer. I handled your son's legal affairs." I straightened up. "Yes, Mr. Tully, I remember you." "I'm calling to let you know that your son left some documents with my office," he said. "We need you to come by next Tuesday afternoon. There are some things you'll want to hear." For a second, I didn't know what to say. "He left something for me?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "It's important that you're there in person. 2:00 sharp, if possible." "I'll be there," I said quickly before he could change his mind. After he hung up, I sat there, holding the phone, listening to the dial tone until it faded into silence. I didn't move right away. My heart was beating faster than it had in weeks. The lawyer's words echoed in my head. "Your son left some documents." Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just paperwork. But a small part of me, a part I thought had died with Michael, felt something it hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped and the streetlights reflected on the wet pavement. The world outside looked softer, quieter. The kind of quiet that doesn't hurt as much. I touched the glass and whispered, Michael, what did you leave me? For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't ache the same way. It still hurt, but there was something else mixed in. A spark. Faint but real. I sat back down on the bed, staring at the phone. The room was still small, still smelled like smoke and old air, but it didn't feel completely empty anymore. That night, I didn't sleep much. But when I did, I dreamed of Michael. Not sick or gone, but standing in the sunlight, smiling the way he used to. And when I woke up, my heart was still beating. Not from pain, but from something that felt almost like anticipation. The office smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. The walls were lined with framed certificates, and the carpet looked as though it had been vacuumed a little too many times. Everything about the place was quiet, steady, controlled, the kind of environment where big things were said in small voices. Bob Tully had been my husband's friend years ago. He was one of those men who always wore a suit, even on weekends. When I saw him standing by the door, I almost felt comforted. At least there was one familiar face in this whole mess. "Mrs. Cooper," he said kindly, shaking my hand. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." I nodded. "Thank you, Bob." He guided me into his office. Amber was already there, sitting in a high-backed chair with her legs crossed, looking perfectly put together, not a single line out of place. Beside her sat her brother, Jason. He looked impatient, tapping a pen against his notepad like he had somewhere better to be. Amber smiled at me, that same polite smile she used at the funeral. "Nancy," she said softly, "I didn't realize you'd be here today." I sat down across from them, folding my hands in my lap. I was asked to come. Before anyone could say more, Bob closed the door and took his seat behind the desk. He adjusted his glasses and glanced between us. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I'll get right to it. As you know, I handled your son's and your husband's legal affairs. We're here today to read Michael's last will and testament." Amber leaned forward slightly, her tone smooth. "Yes, of course. I've already provided the necessary paperwork." Bob nodded. "That's right. However, there are a few details that need to be read aloud, as per his request." Jason exhaled loudly, as if this was all routine to him. "Let's just get through it, shall we?" Bob opened a folder and began reading. His voice was calm and even, like a man who's done this 100 times. Michael Cooper leaves all jointly held assets, including the residence at 1 and 12 Maple Drive, the vehicle and the life insurance policy, to his wife, Amber Cooper. Amber smiled, glancing briefly at Jason. He gave her a quick nod. She reached over and rested her hand on his, like she was rewarding herself for winning something. I sat quietly, listening, my stomach tight. It wasn't that I expected anything. I just wanted to hear my son's name spoken kindly, wanted to know he'd thought of me. Then Bob paused. He cleared his throat and his tone changed just slightly. "There is, however, one additional clause," he said. "This part was handwritten and added 3 months before Michael's passing." The air in the room shifted. Amber's smile froze, and Jason stopped tapping his pen. Bob pulled out another sheet of paper, this one written in blue ink, the handwriting unmistakably Michael's. His voice softened as he read, "To my mother, Nancy Cooper, who gave me the down payment for our home, and who has never asked for anything in return, I leave the contents of Safety Deposit Box 227 at Coastal Federal Bank, along with all documents and access rights contained therein." The words hit me like a quiet wave. I blinked, trying to make sense of them. A safety deposit box? Michael never mentioned anything about that. Amber broke the silence with a short, sharp laugh. "There's no safety deposit box," she said. "Michael didn't have one. I would know." Bob looked up at her calmly. "Actually," he said, reaching into his folder, "there is." He pulled out a small sealed envelope stamped and labeled with the bank's name. He left this with me, along with a note instructing that Mrs. Cooper, he looked at me, be given access to it. Amber's face lost a bit of color. "That's impossible," she said quickly. "He handled everything through our joint account. I saw all of his financial records. If there was something else, I would have known." Bob kept his voice steady. "This was added separately, Mrs. Cooper. I verified the documentation myself. Michael came in to sign it on February 15th. I remembered that date. It was the day after Valentine's Day. We'd had dinner together that evening. He seemed quiet, distracted. When I asked if something was wrong, he just said, 'I'm fine, Mom. Just thinking about some things.'" Amber leaned forward. "This must be a mistake. Maybe it's just some old account or paperwork. There's no reason my mother-in-law needs to be involved. Bob smiled faintly, in that way lawyers do when they know something you don't. There's no mistake, and as per your husband's instructions, the contents of that box are to be accessed by Mrs. Cooper, and Mrs. Cooper alone. Jason finally spoke up. What if we contest it? You're free to, Bob said, still calm, but I assure you it's legally sound. Michael was of clear mind when he wrote it. I was here when he signed it. The room went silent. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Amber sat back, her jaw tight. This is ridiculous, she muttered. There's probably nothing in it anyway. Bob handed me the sealed envelope. It was heavier than I expected. Inside was a small brass key taped to a note with the bank's address printed neatly below. This is for you, Mrs. Cooper, he said gently. You'll need to show your ID at the bank. They'll handle the rest. I took the envelope carefully, feeling its weight in my hands. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Amber's voice cut through the air, sharp now. You can't just... Mrs. Cooper? Bob interrupted firmly. Your husband's wishes are final. For a moment, no one moved. Then Amber stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse. Come on, Jason, she said. We're done here. They left the room without looking at me. The door clicked shut behind them. Bob let out a small sigh and gave me a kind smile. Michael wanted you to have this, he said softly. He was very specific about it. I looked down at the envelope again. My fingers brushed the edge of the key. For the first time since he died, I felt something other than grief. As the clock ticked in the quiet room, each sound felt like a heartbeat, pulling me toward whatever truth Michael had left behind for me to find. The next Tuesday, I drove to Coastal Federal Bank with the envelope from Bob Tully sitting on the passenger seat beside me. I kept glancing at it at every red light, like it might disappear if I didn't keep an eye on it. The brass key taped to the letter felt heavier than it should have. When I parked and walked inside, the air conditioning hit me like a wall. The place smelled faintly of new carpet and coffee. People were lined up at the counters, talking quietly. I went to the reception desk, holding the envelope like it might break. I'm here to see Mrs. Porter, I said softly. I have an appointment. The woman behind the counter smiled politely. Of course, Mrs. Cooper. She's expecting you. A few minutes later, I heard a familiar voice. Nancy Cooper? Oh my goodness, Miss Cooper. I turned, and there she was, Darlene Porter, one of my old students from years ago when I was still teaching third grade. She was taller now, dressed in a navy blue blazer, her hair streaked with gray, but her smile was the same. Darlene, I said, surprised. Look at you. She walked over quickly and hugged me. I heard about Michael. I'm so sorry. He talked about you every time he came in here. He came here? I asked. She nodded. Quite often, actually. Always polite, always smiling. He used to bring that little notebook of his, said he was preparing something special for his mom. I guess this must be it. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized Michael had been coming here regularly. Whatever this was, he'd planned it carefully. Would you like me to take you to the vault? She asked gently. I nodded. Yes, please. We walked through a pair of glass doors, then down a hallway that grew quieter with each step. The smell of metal and polished wood filled the air. Darlene swiped her card, and the heavy door to the vault clicked open. Inside, the lighting was soft, golden, almost like candlelight. Your son's box is right here, she said, pointing to the far wall. Number 227. Take your time. I'll be right outside if you need anything. She inserted the master key, and I slid the smaller brass key from my envelope into the second lock. It turned with a soft click. When the drawer opened, a faint metallic sound echoed through the room. The box was larger than I expected, maybe the size of a briefcase. It wasn't heavy, but I could feel the weight of what it meant. I carried it to one of the small private rooms and closed the door behind me. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air vent. I placed the box on the table and opened the lid slowly. Inside were 3 things: a folded letter, a stack of documents bound with a rubber band, and a small silver USB drive. I sat down and stared at the letter for a long time before opening it. The handwriting was unmistakably Michael's, neat, careful, the same way he used to label his school folders when he was little. I unfolded the paper and began to read. Mom, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry you had to go through this alone. I know Amber won't make things easy for you, and I'm not surprised. I've known for a while what kind of person she really is, but I don't blame her. I chose her, and that's on me. What I do blame myself for is letting you carry the burden of that down payment without ever paying you back. You gave me $40,000 to start this home, and you never asked for a cent in return. I couldn't live with that. So I started investing that money. I wanted it to grow into something that would give you comfort, something that said, you mattered. The accounts attached here belong to you now. The balance as of February was around $185,000. Everything is in your name. There's also a folder of documents, proof of the things Amber and Jason said about you, the lies they told, the ways they manipulated both of us. I kept it all. If they ever try to make you feel small, show them that you raised a man who didn't forget where he came from. I love you, Mom. Always. Michael. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking. I set the letter down and pressed it to my chest. My son, my boy, had been planning this all along. He'd known. I opened the folder next. Inside were printouts of bank statements, copies of emails, even screenshots of text messages. My eyes blurred as I tried to read them. I could see Amber's name again and again. She's a nice woman, but she's such a burden. When she's gone, we can finally use that room for something useful. Jason, I'll handle it. Mom Cooper won't know what hit her. There were also credit card statements showing Amber's spending sprees, luxury stores, spa weekends, hotel stays in Chicago, all while she told Michael they were struggling to pay bills. At the bottom of the pile was a printout of an email chain between Amber and Jason titled The House Plan. The last line read, once she's out, everything's ours. Michael won't fight it. He never fights me. I felt my stomach twist. My hands trembled as I put the papers back down. For a long time, I couldn't move. The tears finally came, slow and hot, running down my cheeks until they dripped onto the letter. But mixed in with the heartbreak was something else. Relief. Not because of the money, not even because of the proof, but because Michael hadn't forgotten me. He'd seen it all. And even when I thought I was completely alone, he'd been trying to protect me. I whispered, you knew, didn't you? You knew how this would go. I took a deep breath and wiped my face. My hands still shook, but now I was smiling through the tears. You taught me how to get back up, I said softly, even when you couldn't be here to see it. I gathered the documents in the USB drive, placed them carefully back into the envelope, and closed the box. When I opened the door, Darlene was waiting in the hallway. She looked at me with kind eyes. Are you all right, Miss Cooper? I nodded, my voice barely steady. Yes, sweetheart, I think I am. She smiled. Your son was a good man. Yes, I said quietly. He really was. As I walked out of the bank, the sunlight hit my face. It was the first time in months it didn't feel harsh. I looked down at the envelope in my hands, and for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel small or helpless. Michael hadn't just left me money. He'd left me dignity, proof that I wasn't invisible. And for a moment, I swear, I could almost hear his voice again, calm and certain. It's okay, Mom. I've got you. It was late morning when the phone rang. I was sitting by the window at the motel, drinking lukewarm coffee and staring at the envelope from the bank that I still hadn't put down since yesterday. For a second, I thought it might be Mr. Tully calling again, maybe to explain what to do next. But when I looked at the screen, the name that appeared made my stomach tighten. Amber. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Hello, I said. Her voice came through soft and sweet, like honey that's been sitting too long, too thick, too practiced. Mom, I was hoping you'd answer. How are you holding up? I almost laughed. Mom. That was the first time she'd called me that since the funeral. I'm fine, I said simply. She hesitated. That's good. I've been thinking about everything that's happened. It's been such a hard few weeks for all of us. I'd really like to meet. Maybe have lunch? There are things we should probably talk about. Like what? I asked. She paused again just long enough to sound deliberate. The bank. I let the silence stretch for a moment. I could hear traffic in the background on her end. The faint hum of her car maybe, or a cafe patio. She was trying to sound casual, but I could tell she was nervous. Her voice had that slight edge to it, the one people get when they're pretending not to care about something they desperately want. I took a slow breath. Lunch sounds fine, I said. Where? She brightened instantly, her tone light again. How about the Maple Diner, 1 o'clock? It's quiet there. Sure, I replied. I'll be there. Perfect, she said quickly. And, Mom, I just want us to talk. No tension, no fighting. Just two women trying to figure things out. Of course, I said. I think it's time we cleared the air. We said our polite goodbyes, and when I hung up, I sat for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. The words the bank echoed in my head. So she knew. Or at least she suspected something. Maybe she'd called Mr. Tully herself. Maybe she'd tried to get information and been turned away. The thought almost made me smile. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't the one caught off guard. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The woman looking back at me didn't look broken anymore. The dark circles were still there, the lines deeper than before, but there was something steadier in her eyes. Something clear. I picked up Michael's letter from the nightstand and read the last line again. If they ever try to make you feel small, show them that you raised a man who didn't forget where he came from. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and tucked it into my purse. Then I looked out the window at the gray sky. The clouds were moving fast, rolling over the motel sign like a warning. A week ago, that kind of weather would have scared me. Today, it just felt right. When I got into my car, I turned on the radio, more for the noise than the music. My hands didn't shake this time. The road ahead was wet but clear. As I drove toward the diner, I thought about how strange life could be, how quickly you can lose everything, and how sometimes what you think is the end is just the moment before something new begins. I wasn't afraid of Amber anymore. I knew who she was now, and more importantly, I knew what Michael had left me. Not just money, not just proof, but strength. For so long, she had been the one in control. She had decided where I could live, what I could keep, even how I should grieve. But this time, the conversation wouldn't go her way. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the sky had darkened. The first drops of rain began to hit the windshield. I watched them slide down the glass and smiled faintly. For once, the storm didn't scare me. It felt like a signal. Amber thought she was summoning me to talk about money, about power. But this time, I wasn't the guest at her table. This time, I was bringing something with me. The truth. The rain picked up, and I reached over to the passenger seat, grabbing my purse. The letter, the documents, the USB, everything Michael had left me was inside. I looked out at the diner's bright red sign glowing against the gray sky. The storm was coming. But for the first time, I wasn't running from it. This time, I was the one holding the umbrella. When I arrived at the house, I almost didn't recognize it. The lawn was freshly trimmed, the curtains pulled tight, the flower pots lined up perfectly along the porch railing. Everything looked the same, and yet completely different. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a showroom. Amber opened the door before I could knock. Her smile was practiced, her lipstick a shade too bright for a widow. "Mom," she said warmly. "Come in. I'm so glad you came." I stepped inside and looked around. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and perfume. The dining room table was set beautifully. Fresh lilies, folded napkins, wine glasses sparkling under the chandelier. She had even used the wedding china, the same set I had gifted them years ago. And right there at the head of the table was an empty chair. Michael's chair. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. "Still spotless," I said softly. "Like no one ever actually lived here?" Amber gave a small, nervous laugh. "You know me. I like things tidy. Please, sit. I made your favorite, chicken salad and iced tea." I sat slowly, running my hand along the edge of the table. The surface was polished, not a speck of dust in sight. She poured the tea and smiled again, the same way she always did when she wanted something. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, "about everything that's happened. About how I might have overreacted. You've been through so much, and I want us to move forward. We're still family, aren't we?" "Family?" I repeated quietly, letting the word linger in the air. Family doesn't throw each other out the day after a funeral. Amber's hand froze halfway to her glass. Her smile faltered for just a second. "I was grieving," she said quickly. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I said things I didn't mean." "You meant every word," I said calmly. "You just didn't think I'd still be standing here to repeat them." Her cheeks flushed. She looked down, fiddling with her napkin. "Look, I just want peace between us. I don't want things to be ugly." "Then why invite me here?" I asked. "You never cared for small talk." She hesitated again. I wanted to ask about the bank," she said finally. Bob mentioned you came by. I was just wondering what Michael left. If there's anything I need to help you with. I took a slow sip of tea and set the glass down. That's kind of you, I said evenly. But you don't need to worry. Everything's taken care of. She tried to sound casual, but her voice trembled slightly. So, what exactly did you find? I smiled. You really want to know? Amber nodded quickly, her eyes bright but wary. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. It's better if I show you. I scrolled for a moment, then turned the screen toward her. It was a photo. One of the emails from the folder Michael had left me. The text was, clear, the sender unmistakable. When she's gone, I'm turning that guest room into my home gym. Finally. Amber's face went pale. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Recognize it? I asked quietly. She blinked, trying to recover. That's taken out of context. I leaned back in my chair. I'm sure it is. Just like the text to your brother about convincing Michael to handle me, or the one about how you couldn't wait for the insurance check to clear. Her jaw tightened. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. My son understood too. He saw everything. He knew who you were long before I did, and he made sure I'd find out in his own way. Amber's breath came faster now. You're twisting this. Michael left proof, I said, my voice low and steady. Emails, texts, bank records, all of it. She stared at me, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to keep her composure. I looked around the room again, at the framed photos, the spotless kitchen, the fake piece of it all, and then back at her. You always said this was your house? I said softly. But you built it on my money, my son's kindness, and your own lies. And now that the truth is out, you're afraid of losing it. Amber's eyes filled with panic. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. It wasn't supposed to be like this. No, I said, standing up slowly. It wasn't. She reached for me, but I stepped back. Please, Nancy, don't do anything drastic. We can fix this. We can work something out. I looked at her, this woman who had taken so much and still thought she could bargain her way out. There's nothing to fix, I said simply. I'm not angry anymore. Then what are you? She asked, her voice breaking. I smiled faintly. Prepared. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Amber's breathing was shallow, her eyes darting between me and my phone. I looked at her one last time. You see, Amber, some people stay quiet because they're afraid. I stay quiet because I don't have to shout. The truth already speaks loud enough. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I walked toward the door, pausing by Michael's empty chair. My hand brushed the back of it, and for the first time, I didn't feel grief. Just a calm, steady strength. As I stepped outside, I could feel the air shift. The sky was darker now, clouds gathering again. The storm was coming, but I wasn't the one caught in it this time. Some people are silent because they're weak. I'm silent because I already have proof. I came back to the house one last time. Not as a guest, not as someone begging for a place to stay, but as someone who finally understood that she didn't need permission to stand tall. Amber and Jason were waiting in the living room. The curtains were drawn, the air tense and still. A faint smell of coffee lingered, untouched. Amber sat upright on the couch, her eyes red, her lipstick faded. Jason stood behind her, hands in his pockets, jaw clenched tight. Mom, Amber started, her voice shaking. Please, can we just talk? I didn't answer right away. I set my purse down and pulled out the thick folder I had brought from the bank. Michael's folder. It was worn now, edges creased from how many times I had opened and closed it. I placed it gently on the coffee table between us. Amber's eyes followed it. Jason stiffened. What's that? She asked. Proof, I said. My voice was calm even. Everything Michael left for me. Investment documents, account transfers, the messages between you two, the ones where you called me a burden, and the letter where my son said he knew exactly what kind of people you were. Amber's lips parted, but no sound came. Jason looked away, his face pale. I opened the folder and spread the papers out, the account statements, the bank letters, the copies of the emails. The top page was the one that mattered most, the transfer of the investment account, fully in my name. The amount was printed clearly at the top, $185,000. Amber whispered, I can't lose everything. I looked at her, really looked at her, not as my daughter-in-law, not as my son's widow, but as the woman who had turned grief into a game. You haven't lost anything, I said softly. You're just facing what was never yours to keep. Her face crumpled, her voice rising. You can't do this to me. I'm not doing anything, I said, still calm. Michael did. He made sure things would go where they were meant to. She reached for one of the papers, but I placed my hand over it. Don't, I said quietly. You've taken enough. Jason exhaled sharply. Let it go, Amber, he muttered. Amber turned to him furious. You said she wouldn't have proof. You said she'd never find anything. Jason didn't look at her. He kept everything, Amber. I told you he was smarter than you gave him credit for. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I reached into my purse again and pulled out one more thing. The house key. The same key I had carried on my ring since the day I moved in. I looked at it for a second before placing it on the table beside the papers. I don't need this anymore, I said. The house was never mine, not really. But it doesn't matter. I have something more important now. Amber's voice broke. What's that? Peace, I said simply. She stared at the key, her hands trembling. Then slowly she sank down onto the couch, her shoulders shaking. Jason looked at her, then at me. You're not going to press charges? He asked quietly. I shook my head. No, the truth is enough. Let her live with it. Amber's sobs filled the room, quiet, uneven, the sound of someone realizing they had run out of moves to play. I gathered the folder, closed it carefully, and slid it back into my purse. Then I stood up. You'll get through this, I said softly. Or you won't. That's not my burden to carry anymore. Amber didn't answer. She just covered her face with her hands. Jason turned away completely, staring out the window, pretending not to see her fall apart. I walked toward the door. My steps were slow, steady. The same hallway where she had once told me to pack and leave felt lighter now. I passed the photographs on the wall, all smiles, all lies. I didn't stop. At the door, I paused and looked back one last time. The sunlight had started to filter through the curtains, cutting across the living room like a quiet verdict. Amber was still crying, Jason silent beside her. I opened the door, and a warm breeze drifted in. It carried the smell of freshly cut grass and something else. Freedom, maybe. I stepped outside. The air felt different, softer somehow. I took one deep breath and let it fill me. Behind me, the door swung slowly shut. The sound was light, almost gentle, but to me it echoed like a final sentence. For so long I had thought justice had to be loud, that it needed to come with anger, with shouting, with punishment. But standing there in the sunlight, I realized I'd been wrong. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly. It doesn't strike, it settles. It doesn't destroy, it restores. I walked down the path toward my car, the gravel crunching under my shoes. I didn't look back. Michael had already given me everything I needed, truth, dignity, peace, and maybe that was the real inheritance all along. It took me 3 days to move into the new apartment. It was small, just one bedroom, a kitchen barely big enough for a table, and a balcony that overlooked a small park in Bloomington. But it was mine. The movers carried the last box inside that morning, and when the door closed behind them, the silence that followed felt different. Not empty, peaceful. I stood there for a long moment looking around. The walls were bare, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and cardboard, and the afternoon light came through the windows in soft golden stripes. I set my purse down on the counter and exhaled. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding my breath these past few months. It wasn't much, but the rent was fair, and the landlord, a kind older woman named Mrs. Green, had left a welcome basket on the counter, tea, sugar cookies, and a note that said, "Home is what you make of it." I smiled when I read it. That afternoon I started unpacking. I didn't have many things left, just the ones that mattered. The rest I'd left behind, along with the memories I didn't need anymore. The first thing I placed on the shelf was the framed photo of Michael. It was the one from his college graduation, his smile wide and proud, his eyes full of that quiet kindness that had always been his way. I touched the frame lightly. "We made it, sweetheart," I whispered. Then I found the small ceramic pot wrapped in newspaper. It was the one he had given me years ago on Mother's Day, when he was still in high school. The pot had a small crack along one side, but I couldn't bear to throw it away. I set it on the windowsill and filled it with soil. From a paper bag I pulled out a few small seedlings, flowers I had picked up that morning from the market. "Let's start again," I said softly as I pressed the soil around the roots. "Something new," just for us. When I finished, I stood back and looked at the little plant in the sunlight. It wasn't much, but it was alive. It was a beginning. The knock on the door came just as I was sweeping up. I opened it to see Lucy standing there with her white cat cradled in her arms. She looked shy at first, then grinned when she saw me. "Co Nancy," she said, handing me a small envelope. "Mom said I could walk over by myself. I brought you something." I took the envelope and smiled. "You didn't have to bring me anything, sweetheart." "I wanted to," she said quickly. "I made it myself." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a small card drawn with colored pencils. On the front was a picture of a house surrounded by flowers and a big yellow sun in the corner. Inside, in neat handwriting, it said, "Dear Miss Nancy, I'm happy you have a new home. I'll come help you take care of your cat and flowers. Love, Lucy." I felt my throat tighten. "Oh, honey," I said, kneeling down to hug her. "Thank you. That means more to me than you know." She hugged me back tightly. "It's prettier here than your old house," she said with the simple honesty only a child can have. I laughed softly. "It's smaller," I said. "But that's okay. A house doesn't have to be big. It just needs people who mean what they say." She smiled. "Then it's perfect." Lucy stayed for a while, helping me water the plants and playing with the cat. The laughter that filled the apartment that afternoon felt like something I hadn't heard in years. It wasn't forced, it wasn't heavy, it was real. After she left, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. Outside, the park was full of life. Children running, people walking their dogs, leaves rustling in the wind. The air smelled like spring. I opened the window, the curtains lifted slightly with the breeze, and the sunlight poured in, landing right on the picture of Michael. It made the glass shimmer for a moment, as if he were smiling just a little brighter. I thought about everything that had happened, the funeral, the betrayal, the silence, the truth. It all felt distant now, like a bad dream that had finally ended. What remained wasn't anger or sadness anymore. It was gratitude for what I'd survived, for what Michael had left me, for what I still had the chance to build. I picked up the small pot again and adjusted it slightly so the sunlight touched every leaf. "You'd like it here," I said softly. "It's quiet, simple, feels like home." Outside, a group of kids ran past, their laughter echoing through the street. Somewhere in that sound, I could almost hear Michael's voice, not in words, but in the feeling it left behind. Warm, steady, safe. I leaned back in my chair, watching the curtain sway. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anything. Not for justice, not for apologies, not even for forgiveness. All I wanted was peace. And now, I had it. In the end, I realized there was one thing Amber could never take from me, the way I choose to live the rest of my life. The wind blew through the window again, carrying with it the smell of rain and lilacs. I smiled and closed my eyes. For once, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like home. It was a quiet evening, the kind that settles softly over everything. The park outside was bathed in orange light, and from my little apartment, I could hear the sound of children laughing somewhere in the distance. I sat by my table, a cup of tea growing cold beside me, and a blank sheet of paper in front of me. For weeks, I had thought about writing this letter. Every time I tried, the words wouldn't come. But tonight, I finally felt ready. Maybe it was the calm that comes after too many storms. Maybe it was the feeling that Michael was closer somehow, sitting right there beside me the way he used to. I picked up my pen and began. "My dear son, thank you for keeping your promise, even from a place I can't reach. You said once that you would always take care of me, and I didn't believe you. I told you no one could protect anyone forever, but you proved me wrong. You kept your word in the quietest, most unexpected way. You gave me back something I didn't even know I had lost, my dignity. The truth you left behind became the light that guided me out of the darkness. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave it meaning. It reminded me that love can be strong without shouting, and justice can be soft without being weak. Amber, I've forgiven her. Not because she deserves it, but because I need peace. Carrying anger only kept me tied to the past, and I've had enough of that. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means I can finally breathe again. She'll have to live with the choices she made. Life has a way of balancing its own scales. I don't need to watch it happen. I've moved into a small apartment near the park. It's simple, but it's full of light. I planted the flowers you once gave me, and they're already starting to bloom. Every morning, I water them and think of you. There's a picture of you on the wall, the one from graduation, and it's the first thing I see when I wake up. Lucy visits often. She brings her white cat and helps me take care of the plants. You'd like her? She reminds me of you at that age. Curious, kind, full of life. She gave me a card the other day that said, "I'm happy you have a new home." It made me cry, but the good kind of tears. The kind that comes from remembering you without breaking. I still miss you, Michael. I always will. But missing you doesn't hurt the way it used to. It feels gentle now, like a quiet echo instead of a wound. If I could tell you one thing, it's that I'm okay. Truly. I'm no longer afraid of being alone. You taught me that love doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. Sometimes it becomes memory, sometimes it becomes courage. For me, it became the strength to start over. I promise to use the gift you left me wisely, not just the money, but the second chance. I'll keep living with kindness, even when the world doesn't deserve it. And I'll tell our story so other mothers who feel small or forgotten will know that silence can be powerful. You taught me that I don't have to shout to be heard. You gave me back my voice by reminding me that it was never really gone. I stopped writing there, my pen hovering over the paper. I read the words again, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fix anything. It was enough. The letter wasn't about grief anymore. It was about peace. I folded the paper neatly and placed it in an envelope. On the front, I wrote in careful letters, "For Michael." Then I stood up and walked out onto the small balcony. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of gold and pink. The breeze carried the faint smell of lilacs from the park below. I leaned on the railing and closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. Down below, I heard a familiar voice. "Miss Nancy, are you coming for a walk?" It was Lucy waving up at me, her cat perched in her arms like a fluffy snowball. I smiled and called back, "Give me 1 minute, sweetheart." I looked at the letter one last time, then placed it on the little table by the window. "You'll wait for me here," I whispered. When I stepped outside, the last light of day brushed against my hair. The street glowed with the reflection of the sunset, and the air felt light in a way it hadn't in years. Lucy waited at the gate, smiling. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready," I said, and meant it. We walked toward the park, our steps slow but steady. The birds were flying low, their wings glinting in the fading light. Somewhere behind us, the apartment window caught the sunset and turned it into a soft, golden shimmer. I thought about all the nights I'd spent crying, all the words I never got to say, and realized they didn't matter anymore. The silence that once felt like punishment now felt like peace. As the path curved around the park, Lucy slipped her hand into mine. The world felt quiet but not empty, full of something invisible, something calm. I looked up at the sky and smiled. Sometimes justice doesn't need a gavel. Sometimes it just needs one woman who finally remembers she deserves to be loved. The piano began to play softly, slow, gentle notes blending with the sound of the evening wind. The camera panned upward, the sun dipping below the trees, the sky turning soft orange, a flock of birds crossing the light, and in that moment it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something quiet and beautiful. The life Michael had wanted for me all along.